Good news, everyone, for President Bush. He's beating Democrats in the polls. Bad news, the Democrat he beat is Jimmy Carter, and he beat him to the bottom. A new Newsweek poll finding that Bush's job approval numbers are now lower than President Carter's ever were, 26% to the Carter low of 28%. The poll also puts the president in striking distance of Richard Nixon's record of 23%. And our fourth story tonight, the president has sunk so low, we learned today he cannot even run the vice president. A Bush executive order commands everyone in the executive branch to report on handling of classified material. But Dick Cheney has not done so since 2002. Today, the House Oversight Committee revealed that in 2004, the Information Security Oversight Office, ISOO, tried to inspect Cheney's office but was denied entry. In fact, Cheney responded by trying to destroy ISOO. Why the lack of cooperation? His office says, quote, the reporting requirement does not apply to Cheney's office, which has both legislative and executive functions. In other words, his functions outside the executive branch exempt him from oversight by the executive branch. But if he's outside the executive branch and he's not a legislator and not a judge, there remains only one possible alternative. Vice President Dick Cheney is a rogue nation. Despite the recent capture of his top lieutenant, Mr. Cheney continues to defy the rule of law, attempting to destroy ISOO, an office of the U.S. government after all, and barring inspections in true Saddam style, leaving only one possible remedy: invade him, in order to establish a free and democratic Dick Cheney. Let's turn now to Newsweek's senior White House correspondent, and therefore apparently not Dick Cheney correspondent, Richard Wolff, also, of course, our political analyst. It is good to talk to you again tonight, sir.
Good to be with you, Keith.
If Mr. Cheney claims exemption from oversight of the executive branch, is there anybody, any remaining agency whose authority he does recognize? I mean, maybe the NRA?
Yeah, well, it's not the first time they have made this argument. There are some pretty innocuous things that the Vice President's office has tried to avoid using this specious argument that was crafted, incidentally, by his Chief of Staff, David Addington, who's a pretty high-powered lawyer himself. You know, they've denied filing reports on outside travel, which the President's own aides have no problem in filing, and their argument is that they're not part of the executive branch, which is curious. I mean, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but say I was a strict constructionist, it would be pretty easy to frame the argument that the founders wanted there to be checks and balances. Obviously, it doesn't apply to the vice president.
And if Mr. Cheney succeeded in legally carving himself out of the executive branch, would he not also necessarily abdicate many of the protections of that branch, the ones that have shielded him in this cone of silence?
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, this is obviously a sort of Guantanamo Bay situation. And it has come up, for instance, in the whole debate about deleted emails. If you're going to run government business through your private accounts, then you can't then claim executive privilege. So your only possibility is, well, deleting everything. This is a very rocky path. And frankly, if it's constitutional, then I'm a banana.
We mentioned Scooter Libby in jest, but that, too, was about classified information, and Congressman Waxman has said now that Mr. Cheney has a poor record of keeping too much secret and letting too much out for political ends. How fair is that charge?
I think it's very fair, and there are strange lines around the secrecy that the Vice President operates. I mean, we're not talking about consultations on policy formation. It extended, for instance, when he had that unfortunate encounter with his friend when he was out shooting. They said, the Vice President's office said, that this was private travel. I mean, the very concept that the Vice President could be doing something privately is strange. And again, it's something that even the President's aides don't agree with and don't live with. So why they have ring-fenced themselves is very, very curious.
Is there any sense today, and we mentioned this appalling number of the President's approval rate now down below that of Jimmy Carter's and heading into Richard Nixon territory, is there any assessment, any way to tell how much, or if, presuming he does, the Vice President factors into the Bush approval numbers these days, or is it just Iraq dwarfing everything else at this point?
I think it is Iraq, and that's certainly the view of the President's closest aides. Remember that the President had this grand surge and his own faithful have lost confidence in it. You know, it strikes me when you look at these numbers, everyone says, well, it's reached rock bottom. But then John McCain, who knows something about sliding poll numbers, likes to say, he says there's a Chairman Mao quote that it's always darkest just before it's completely black. And these numbers certainly look that way. They can actually get worse, and they are.
Our own Richard Wolff, senior White House correspondent for Newsweek magazine and Not a Banana. Great thanks, Richard.
Anytime.
Speaking